The moment I realized something was terribly wrong at my son's wedding was not during the ceremony. It was not during the reception. It happened when I saw a version of the day that somehow no longer seemed to include me. I am Margaret Bennett, 69 years old, and for months I believed my son Daniel's wedding would be one of the happiest days of my life. After my husband passed away 8 years ago, Daniel became the center of my world. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone mattered even more because there were only the two of us left carrying the memories of the family we had built together. When Daniel proposed to Olivia, I was genuinely happy for them. She was charming, intelligent, and ambitious. I welcomed her into our family with an open heart. During the year leading up to the wedding, I helped however I could. I addressed invitations, coordinated with relatives traveling from other states, and even contributed financially when unexpected expenses appeared. I never kept score. That is what mothers do. We help because we love. 3 days before the wedding, the venue hosted the final rehearsal and planning meeting. The event was being held at a beautiful vineyard just outside Napa Valley. The rolling hills were covered in rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. White flowers decorated the ceremony space, and soft string lights hung above the reception area. Everything looked exactly like the dream wedding Daniel and Olivia had described. I arrived early carrying a folder filled with notes and contact information for several family members. I wanted to make sure everything ran smoothly. As I entered the reception hall, I noticed a large display board showing the wedding schedule. Guests were gathering around it, reviewing the timeline and seating arrangements. Smiling, I walked over to take a look. At first, I thought I was reading it incorrectly. Then I looked again. My smile slowly disappeared. Under the ceremony participants, I saw Daniel's name, Olivia's name, bridesmaids, groomsmen, flower girl, ring bearer. Even distant relatives had assigned roles. But my name was nowhere to be found. I stood there staring at the board, longer than I should have. Perhaps there had been a mistake. Perhaps another version existed somewhere. I searched every section again. Nothing. A few minutes later, Olivia appeared beside me. Her smile was bright and effortless. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded. Then I pointed gently toward the board. "I may be overlooking it, but I do not see my role listed anywhere." For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face before the smile returned. "Oh, that. It is probably a formatting issue from the planner. You know how these things happen." Her answer sounded reasonable, yet something about it felt rehearsed. Before I could ask another question, she excused herself and walked toward a group of bridesmaids. I remained where I was, watching the board. An uncomfortable feeling settled into my chest. Later that afternoon, as the rehearsal continued, I noticed something else. Parents of the bride were being escorted through a special entrance process. Family photographs had designated time slots. Toast schedules had been finalized. Again, my name seemed strangely absent. No one said anything directly. No one was rude. That almost made it worse. It felt as though I was becoming invisible one small decision at a time. Driving home that evening, I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Weddings were stressful. Details changed constantly. Still, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, I could not shake a troubling question. If this was truly Daniel's wedding too, then why did it suddenly feel like there was no place left for his mother? The next morning, I woke up hoping the uneasy feeling would fade. Sometimes a good night's sleep has a way of putting worries back into perspective. Unfortunately, this was not one of those times. As I made coffee in my kitchen and watched the sunrise through the window, I found myself replaying the rehearsal over and over again. Olivia's explanation had sounded reasonable, yet something continued bothering me. It was not simply the missing role. It was the pattern of small omissions surrounding it. By noon, I received an email from the wedding planner containing an updated itinerary for immediate family members. I opened it without much thought, expecting to find clarification. Instead, my concern deepened. The parents of the bride were listed in multiple sections. They had designated arrival times, photography schedules, reserved transportation, and special seating instructions. My section consisted of a single line confirming my attendance as a guest. A guest? I stared at the screen for several seconds. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He answered after a few rings, sounding distracted but cheerful. Wedding preparations had clearly consumed most of his attention. I asked how everything was going. We talked briefly about family arriving from different states and last-minute details. Then I casually mentioned the itinerary. There was a pause. That seems strange, he admitted. I thought Mom would be included in more of the family events. Hearing him say that gave me a small sense of relief. At least I was not imagining things. Before we could discuss it further, someone called his name in the background. He apologized and promised we would talk later. The conversation ended before I could ask additional questions. That afternoon, I drove to the vineyard again to drop off a small wedding gift I had arranged for the couple. Several staff members were busy preparing tables and decorations. As I carried the package toward the reception hall, I noticed a large seating chart displayed near the entrance. Curious, I stepped closer. My assigned seat was near the back of the room. At first, I assumed there must be another chart for family members. Then I searched the entire display. The bride's parents sat directly beside the head table. Several cousins occupied nearby tables. Even family friends were positioned closer to the couple than I was. Meanwhile, I had been assigned a seat beside distant acquaintances I barely knew. A young employee noticed me looking at the chart. "Everything okay?" she asked politely. I forced a smile and nodded, just making sure I found my table. As I turned away, embarrassment settled heavily over me. I felt foolish for being upset over seating arrangements. Yet deep down, I knew. It was about more than chairs and table numbers. Each detail pointed in the same direction. Later that evening, my sister Carol called to discuss travel plans. During the conversation, she casually mentioned how excited she was for my speech at the reception. "My speech?" I asked. Carol sounded confused. "I assumed you were giving one. You are the groom's mother." The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. No one had mentioned a speech. No one had asked me to prepare remarks. No one had included me in that portion of the celebration. After we ended the call, I sat alone in my living room staring at the wedding folders spread across the coffee table. For the first time, a painful possibility entered my mind. What if none of these things were accidents? What if every missing roll, every changed seat, every overlooked moment was part of a deliberate effort to move me quietly to the sidelines of my own son's wedding? The day before the wedding, I returned to the vineyard for what was supposed to be a simple final walkthrough. By then, I had convinced myself to remain calm. I did not want suspicion to ruin Daniel's special weekend. Even if mistakes had been made, I wanted to believe they could still be corrected. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the property as vendors moved between buildings carrying flowers, linens, and decorations. Everything appeared beautiful from a distance. Yet the closer I looked, the more I felt like an outsider observing someone else's celebration. While walking toward the reception hall, I stopped near a side patio to answer a phone call from Carol. We spoke briefly about arrival times and family photographs. After hanging up, I noticed two women standing nearby, discussing the wedding schedule. One of them wore a staff badge from the planning company. The other appeared to be coordinating floral arrangements. They did not realize I was within earshot. "Did you update the family photo list?" one asked. "Yes," the other replied. The bride wanted a few changes. Normally, I would have paid no attention. Weddings involved constant adjustments. Then I heard my name. She specifically asked that Margaret not be included in several of the featured photo sessions. For a moment, I froze. The women continued talking. Apparently, they want to keep the focus on the couple and the bride's family during the main album. The other woman shrugged as though it were a routine request. My heart sank. I quietly stepped away before they noticed me. I walked toward an empty section of the vineyard and sat on a wooden bench overlooking the rows of grapevines. The breeze moved gently through the leaves, but I barely noticed it. Until that moment, I had been searching for innocent explanations. Now I had heard something direct, something intentional. Someone had made a decision, and that someone was not Daniel. As I sat there, another memory surfaced. Several months earlier, Olivia had asked for copies of old family photographs for a wedding display. I had spent hours sorting through albums. Pictures of Daniel as a child, school events, family vacations, birthdays, holidays, moments with his father. I remembered how grateful she seemed when I handed everything over. Suddenly, I wondered how many of those photographs had actually made it into the final display. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I visited the reception hall once more before leaving. Workers were assembling decorative displays near the entrance. One large arrangement featured photographs of both families. I slowly walked closer. Daniel appeared throughout the display. Olivia appeared throughout the display. Her parents appeared repeatedly. Her grandparents. Her cousins. Family vacations. Childhood milestones. I searched carefully. Eventually, I found a single photograph of myself. It had been placed near the bottom corner behind a floral arrangement where it was barely visible. I stood there staring at it for several seconds. The image showed Daniel and me at his college graduation. It should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. Yet somehow, even that memory seemed diminished. On the drive home, I finally stopped asking whether something was wrong. The question had changed. Now I wanted to know why. Why would Olivia work so hard to erase my place from a day that should have celebrated family? Why was she so determined to move me quietly into the background? And most importantly, how much of this did Daniel actually know? For the first time since the wedding planning began, I realized I was no longer dealing with misunderstandings. I was looking at a deliberate pattern, and somewhere behind that pattern was a truth I had not yet uncovered. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph display and the empty spaces where memories should have been. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest and walked downstairs. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table where Daniel had done his homework for years. Looking around that familiar room, I found myself drifting back through decades of memories. After my husband Robert passed away, Daniel was only 22. He had just started building his career and was struggling with grief as much as I was. We leaned on each other through those difficult years. There were months when money was tight. I quietly worked extra hours and postponed my own retirement plans to help him stay on his feet. I never considered it a sacrifice. He was my son. I would have done it 1,000 times over. I remembered helping him make the down payment on his first condominium. I remembered driving 4 hours to help him move furniture. I remembered spending weekends painting walls and assembling shelves because hiring contractors would have cost too much. Every milestone in his life felt like my own victory. When he met Olivia, I wanted her to feel welcome from the very beginning. The first Thanksgiving after they started dating, I set an extra place at the table and spent days preparing her favorite dishes. The first Christmas, I gave her a family photo album that included blank pages so she could help write the next chapters of our story. She cried when she opened it. At least, I thought those tears were genuine. As the years passed, there were small moments that seemed insignificant at the time. A family dinner where Olivia answered questions directed at Daniel before he could speak. Holiday plans that somehow always centered around her side of the family. Last-minute schedule changes that left me excluded from gatherings I thought I was attending. Individually, none of those moments felt important enough to question. Together, they formed a pattern I had ignored because I wanted peace. I wanted harmony. I wanted to believe everyone had good intentions. Sitting alone at the table, I realized something painful. Every time I felt hurt, I had immediately searched for excuses on Olivia's behalf. Every time a boundary was crossed, I convinced myself it was accidental. Not because the evidence supported that conclusion, but because acknowledging the alternative felt too uncomfortable. As dawn approached, I opened an old photo album from the bookshelf in the living room. Page after page showed Daniel growing up. His first bicycle, little league games, school dances, college graduation. Robert stood beside him in so many of those photographs, smiling with quiet pride. One picture stopped me completely. It had been taken shortly before Robert died. The three of us stood together in the backyard. Daniel had one arm around me and the other around his father. We looked happy, safe, united. I traced my finger across the image and remembered something Robert once told me. No matter who enters this family later, you will always be his mother. At the time, the statement seemed obvious. Now it felt strangely important. For the first time since the wedding preparations began, I stopped asking myself whether I deserved better treatment. The answer was clear. The real question was why someone seemed determined to make me forget my place in my own family story. And as the wedding day drew closer, I had a growing feeling that the answer would soon reveal itself. The wedding morning arrived bright and clear. Sunlight poured through my bedroom window long before my alarm sounded. For a few moments, I simply lay there listening to the quiet. This was supposed to be a joyful day. My son was getting married. No matter what had happened during the previous week, I wanted to hold on to that truth. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress that Daniel had once told me made me look elegant. As I fastened a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, I caught my reflection in the mirror and reminded myself of something important. I was not attending this wedding to compete with anyone. I was there because I loved my son. By late morning, guests began arriving at the vineyard. The property looked beautiful beneath the California sun. White roses lined the ceremony aisle. Soft music drifted through the air. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling and greeting one another. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. Yet I could not ignore the strange feeling that followed me throughout the day. Shortly after arriving, I was approached by a young woman named Emily. I recognized her as one of Olivia's bridesmaids. She looked nervous. "Mrs. Bennett, do you have a minute?" she asked quietly. Her tone immediately caught my attention. I followed her to a quiet corner near the reception building. Emily glanced around to make sure no one was nearby. Then she lowered her voice. I have been struggling with whether I should say anything. My heart began beating faster. "Say what?" I asked gently. Emily hesitated before reaching into a small folder she was carrying. She removed several printed pages and handed them to me. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized email headers. Wedding planning correspondence. My eyes moved across the first page. Within seconds, my stomach tightened. The messages were from Olivia. Some were sent directly to the wedding planner. Others had been copied to vendors and coordinators. One line immediately stood out. "Please make sure Daniel's mother is not included in the featured family spotlight portions of the reception." Another message requested that my seating assignment be moved farther from the head table. Another instructed staff to prioritize photographs featuring the bride's family. Each message was polite, professional, calm. Yet together they painted a picture that could no longer be explained away as coincidence. Emily looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I was helping organize vendor packets yesterday," she said. "I saw these and felt terrible. I thought maybe there was some misunderstanding, but after hearing some conversations, I realized there was not." I continued reading. One message hurt more than the others. It simply said, "We want to focus on the family members who have been most involved in our journey." I stared at those words for a long time. Most involved. For years, I had supported Daniel through every challenge and milestone of his life. Yet somehow I had been rewritten out of the story. Emily touched my arm gently. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not think it was right." I thanked her for her honesty and carefully placed the pages back into the folder. As she walked away, I remained standing alone beneath the shade of an oak tree. The truth was finally in my hands. There were no more doubts, no more innocent explanations, no more questions about whether I was imagining things. Olivia had been systematically pushing me aside for months, and as guests continued arriving around me, I realized the wedding day was about to become something very different from what she had planned. I folded the printed emails carefully and placed them inside my purse. For several minutes, I remained beneath the oak tree watching guests arrive. Children ran across the lawn. Couples posed for photographs. Laughter drifted through the vineyard. To everyone else, it was a perfect wedding day. Yet for me, the entire celebration now looked different. The evidence Emily had given me changed everything. More importantly, it revealed something I had not fully understood before. This was never about a few seating assignments or missing photographs. Olivia had been trying to reshape the family narrative itself. She wanted people to see Daniel's story as beginning with her. Everyone who came before was being quietly pushed into the background. As difficult as that realization was, it also brought an unexpected sense of clarity. For days, I had been questioning myself. Now there was nothing left to question. A short time later, guests were invited to take their seats for the ceremony. I found my assigned chair exactly where the seating chart had placed me, several rows farther back than most immediate family members. At first, the placement stung. Then I looked around and noticed something interesting. From where I sat, I could see nearly everything. The entire vineyard stretched before me. The ceremony arch stood framed against the distant hills. The guests filled row after row of white chairs. And most importantly, I could clearly see Daniel. As the music began, he took his place at the front. He looked nervous and excited at the same time. For a moment, I forgot about Olivia, the emails, and the disappointments of the past week. All I saw was my son, the same boy who used to ride his bicycle down our driveway, the same young man who called me after every important job interview, the same person I had loved every day of his life. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The vows were heartfelt. The setting looked like something from a magazine. Yet even during those moments, I noticed subtle things. When family members were acknowledged, the officiant spoke warmly about Olivia's relatives. Stories were shared about her upbringing and family traditions. Daniel's side of the family received only brief mentions. Again, no one thing seemed dramatic by itself. It was the accumulation that mattered. After the ceremony concluded, guests moved toward the reception area for cocktails and photographs. I watched groups gather around the photographer according to a carefully prepared schedule. As expected, several family photo sessions took place without me. Some relatives looked confused when they realized I was not included. Others quietly glanced in my direction, but said nothing. I remained polite, calm, observant. The more I watched, the more I sensed something shifting. People were beginning to notice the pattern on their own. During the cocktail hour, my sister Carol approached me. She lowered her voice. "Margaret, am I imagining things? Or have they been excluding you all day?" I looked at her for a moment before answering. "You are not imagining it." Carol frowned. "Then why has Daniel allowed this?" It was a question I had been asking myself repeatedly. But now, after reading the emails, another possibility seemed more likely. Daniel had been busy, distracted, and trusting. He had probably seen only the polished version of every decision. Someone else had been managing the details behind the scenes. And as the reception doors finally opened and guests began filing inside, I had a feeling that the carefully controlled version of the story was not going to survive much longer. The reception hall glowed beneath hundreds of soft lights suspended from the ceiling beams. Crystal glasses sparkled on every table, and elegant floral arrangements filled the room with color. Guests settled into their seats as servers moved quietly through the crowd. From a distance, everything looked flawless, the kind of wedding people would talk about for years. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension had begun spreading in ways Olivia could not control. I noticed it in the conversations that stopped when I approached, in the curious glances exchanged between relatives, in the growing number of people who seemed confused by the way I had been treated throughout the day. By the time dinner was served, I could feel questions forming throughout the room. After the meal, the reception program moved into speeches. The bride's father spoke first. He shared stories about Olivia's childhood and thanked everyone for attending. The audience laughed and applauded. Then several members of the bridal party gave heartfelt remarks about friendship and love. More applause followed. Throughout it all, I waited quietly, not because I expected recognition anymore, but because I wanted to see how far the omissions would go. Eventually, the master of ceremonies announced the final scheduled speakers. My name was never mentioned. There would be no mother of the groom speech, no acknowledgement, no opportunity to share a single memory about my son. I looked toward Daniel. At first, he appeared surprised, then confused. He leaned toward someone seated nearby and quietly asked a question. The expression on his face changed almost immediately. For the first time that day, I saw him beginning to notice what everyone else had started noticing hours earlier. As the evening continued, another unexpected development occurred. Several relatives approached me individually. An aunt from Oregon, a cousin from Texas, family friends who had known Daniel since childhood. One after another, they asked nearly identical questions. Had there been a schedule change? Was I feeling well? Why had I not participated in the family photographs? Why had I not spoken? Why was I seated so far away from the head table? Their questions confirmed something important. The exclusion was no longer invisible. People saw it. More importantly, they found it strange. During a brief pause between events, Daniel finally made his way across the room to my table. He sat beside me, looking genuinely unsettled. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He glanced around before lowering his voice. "I thought you were supposed to give a speech tonight." I held his gaze for several seconds. Then I asked a simple question. "Did you ever approve removing me from it?" His confusion answered before his words did. No. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see pieces of the puzzle beginning to connect in his mind. Then I carefully removed the folded emails from my purse. I did not hand them to him yet. I simply placed them on the table between us. His eyes dropped to the stack of papers. "What is that?" he asked. "Something you need to read," I replied. Before he could reach for them, the master of ceremonies returned to the microphone and announced the next event. Daniel looked from the stage to the documents and back again. The uncertainty on his face had transformed into concern, deep concern. As he picked up the first page and began reading, the color slowly drained from his expression. Across the room, Olivia was laughing with guests, completely unaware that the carefully managed version of the story she had built for months was beginning to unravel. And for the first time all day, I realized the truth no longer belonged only to me. Daniel read the first page quickly. Then he read it again more slowly. By the time he reached the second email, his entire posture had changed. The cheerful groom who had spent the day greeting guests and celebrating with friends was gone. In his place sat a man trying to understand how so many important decisions had been made without his knowledge. He turned. Another page. Then another. I remained silent. There was nothing left for me to explain. The emails spoke for themselves. Every omission, every seating change, every removed photograph, every adjustment that had quietly pushed me farther away from the center of my own son's wedding. Daniel finally looked up. "When did you get these?" he asked. "Earlier today," I replied. He lowered his eyes again and continued reading. Across the reception hall, the evening carried on. Music played softly. Guests chatted between courses. Yet a subtle shift was beginning to spread through the room. Several relatives had noticed Daniel sitting at my table far longer than expected. Others had already heard pieces of the story through conversations during the cocktail hour. Questions were growing. Eventually, Daniel stood. He gathered the documents carefully and looked toward the head table where Olivia was speaking with members of her bridal party. "I need to talk to her," he said quietly. I nodded. "You deserve the truth." He walked across the room carrying the emails in his hand. I watched from a distance as he approached Olivia. At first, she smiled. Then she noticed the papers. Her expression changed immediately. They stepped aside toward a quieter corner near the dance floor. Nobody could hear their conversation, but the body language told its own story. Daniel asked questions. Olivia answered. Daniel showed her specific pages. Olivia responded. The discussion grew longer, more serious. Guests nearby began noticing. Conversation slowed. Several family members exchanged curious glances. Within minutes, both families understood that something important was happening. Then an unexpected moment changed everything. The wedding planner approached their conversation. Apparently, Daniel had requested clarification about the emails. What happened next surprised even me. The planner calmly confirmed that every instruction in the messages had come directly from Olivia. Not from Daniel. Not from both of them together. From Olivia alone. The confirmation removed any remaining uncertainty. Suddenly, the pattern everyone had sensed throughout the day became impossible to ignore. Family members who had been confused now understood. Relatives who had questioned the seating arrangements suddenly knew why they felt wrong. The truth was no longer hidden inside private emails. It had become visible to everyone. Daniel stood silently for several moments after speaking with the planner. Then he looked around the room. His eyes moved from the family photograph display to the seating chart near the entrance. He seemed to be seeing the entire wedding for the first time. Not the celebration he thought had been planned, but the version that had actually been created. Finally, he walked toward the microphone stand near the dance floor. The room gradually grew quiet. Guests looked up from their tables. The musicians paused. Daniel took a deep breath. His voice remained calm when he spoke. "Before we continue tonight, there is something important I need to say." The silence that followed felt enormous. He looked directly at me. Then he addressed the room. "Many people have asked questions today about my mother and her role in this wedding." Across the hall, dozens of faces turned toward me. Daniel continued. "I recently learned that several decisions were made without my knowledge. Decisions that did not reflect my wishes. No anger. No shouting. Just honesty. Pure and simple." And as he stood there acknowledging the truth in front of everyone, I realized that Olivia's carefully constructed version of the story had finally collapsed under the weight of reality. The room remained silent for several seconds after Daniel finished speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one argued. The truth had already done its work. Standing near the microphone, my son looked older than he had that morning. Not because of the wedding, but because he had just experienced the painful realization that trust can sometimes blind us to what is happening right in front of us. He slowly walked away from the stage and crossed the room toward my table. Every eye followed him. When he reached me, he did something I will never forget. He pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down. Not at the head table. Not beside the wedding party. Beside his mother. The gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet it said more than any speech could have. Around the room, guests quietly exchanged smiles and nods. Many had witnessed the tension throughout the day. Now they were witnessing something far more important. Recognition. Respect. Family. Daniel looked at me and shook his head. "I am sorry, Mom," he said softly. There was genuine regret in his voice. I placed my hand over his. "You do not need to apologize for what you did not know," I replied. He lowered his eyes briefly. Then he smiled sadly. "Maybe not, but I should have paid more attention." Those words mattered because they were true. Not just for him. For all of us. Sometimes people do not lose their place in a family through one dramatic event. Sometimes it happens through small decisions that go unchallenged. Small exclusions that slowly become normal. Small silences that grow larger over time. Across the room, Olivia sat quietly with several members of her family. She looked shaken. For the first time all day, she seemed to understand the consequences of her choices. I felt no desire to humiliate her. No desire for revenge. The goal had never been to embarrass anyone. The goal was simply to make the truth visible. And now it was. A short time later, something unexpected happened. Daniel returned to the microphone. The room gradually settled once again. He smiled toward the guests before speaking. "There is one thing missing from tonight," he said. Then he looked directly at me. My mother never got the opportunity to say a few words. A gentle wave of applause moved through the reception hall. I was completely unprepared. For a moment, I considered declining. Then I remembered Robert. I remembered the years of sacrifice, the years of love, and the years spent helping Daniel become the man standing before me. Slowly, I stood and walked to the microphone. The room fell quiet. I looked across the sea of faces. Family members, friends, people who had watched this difficult day unfold. Then I spoke from the heart. I did not discuss emails. I did not mention seating charts. I did not revisit the hurt. Instead, I spoke about Daniel. I shared memories from his childhood. I spoke about his kindness, his determination, and the way he had always cared for people he loved. I welcomed Olivia into the family and expressed my hope that their marriage would be built on honesty, respect, and mutual understanding. When I finished, many guests were wiping away tears. Daniel hugged me tightly. In that moment, I realized something important. Olivia had spent months trying to reduce my place in the story. Yet the truth was simple. No seating chart could erase decades of love. No photograph arrangement could rewrite history. No carefully planned omission could remove the bond between a mother and her son. As the evening continued beneath the vineyard lights, I felt a peace I had not felt in weeks. The wedding was not perfect. The day had not unfolded as anyone expected. But something valuable had been restored. My voice, my dignity, my place in the family I helped build. And as I watched Daniel laugh with relatives beneath the California night sky, I knew that no one could ever take those things away again.